Hello, everybody, and welcome. It's time for Out There with the Birds with your host, Bill Thompson III and Ben Lizdas. With more than 1 million years of combined bird watching experience on planet Earth and elsewhere, Bill and Ben are here to share their unique perspectives on birding, birders, and a whole lot more. Out There with the Birds is supported by Koa Sporting Optics, makers of the legendary 883 Promenar spotting scope. Visit sportingoptics.koa-usa.com to learn more. Additional support comes from the Reader Rendezvous Birding Adventures from Birdwatchers Digest. Come birding with us in our favorite places. Learn more at birdwatchersdigest.com/rr. And now here they are, Bill and Ben.
Hey, Ben. It's time for another Out There with the Birds.
Hey, Bill. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, man. It's Friday, and it's a storm just blew through here in southeast Ohio. It's looking like it's going to be a humid but sunny weekend, so hoping to get outside and see a few birds. Fall migration's already started. Had a few juvie songbirds, warblers passing through these last few days. Oh, yeah. Huh. So it's good. It's a good time to start watching for, like, really the best time of year for birding in terms of variety of birds and volume of numbers of individual birds is the last 2 weeks of August, first 2 weeks of September. We just get the influx of brand new birds that have just been hatched that summer. Mm-hmm. We get the males cutting out early for the Southland, and the hummingbird numbers are still strong. Resident birds are obviously have also bred and successfully, we hope. And so it's just like, it's even busier on a day-to-day basis than spring, which a lot of people find hard to believe, but I think it's kind of a cool thing. So it's my favorite season for birding on my farm in southeast Ohio.
So do you see a difference in fall versus spring in terms of how the migration shakes out? With you said the males going out first, followed by maybe females, and then there's going to be juveniles. I don't know if they go with the females or not, but is this a pattern that happens in reverse order in the spring, or is this just sort of a post-mating thing where they kind of tend to segregate themselves, be it by age or gender?
No, it's kind of the same order in the spring. The males, territorial songbirds show up first, whether it's an indigo bunting or a rose-breasted grosbeak or a ruby-throated hummingbird. The males come back first, try to snag some sweet territory and defend it against all comers, and then impress the ladies when they start coming back a couple of weeks later.
With their fancy piece of real estate.
That's right. Look what I got. I think it's perfect. Nice. So the difference is, I would say, there are days in the spring when we'll get, the birding will be phenomenal in this part of the world. But then there are also days when it's just dead. Like last spring, we talked about this a few episodes ago. Last spring, for a lot of us here in the Midwest, it was kind of dead, man. It was like there were no days that were sort of memorably great. And there was no string of days that were good, like solidly good in terms of numbers. I think it was weather, we determined from talking to a couple of the experts that you interviewed. It was weather that did it.
Yeah.
But fall, because the weather tends to be kind of mild, you'll get it just consistent. Like there's almost not a day when I don't look out of the kitchen window and see, gnatcatchers or hooded warbler. Or the other day I was sitting out on the back deck, and a Louisiana water thrush came up. So a lot of the birds that are just finished breeding now are hilltopping. So Louisiana water thrushes, they nest along streams here, and they and ovenbirds and worm-eating warblers, Kentucky warblers, these things will hilltop during the day. They'll go up and stop at visit the tops of the hills. I don't know if it's to get out of their foraging territory and head somewhere else. I don't know what a water thrush was doing up there, just passing through, I guess. But he hung around, chipped around the yard and stuff. And so pretty soon here we'll start seeing black-throated greens coming through. A lot of them are, males starting to fade in their plumage. But It's just a great time of year for birding. You just never know what you're going to see.
Mm-hmm. Well, so obviously migration makes for exciting birding, right? It's seasonal by nature. Yep. So, one of the things that I wanted to talk about today is birding spots that you don't necessarily go to where the action is not so much dependent on the season, but the location. I'm talking birding on the borders.
Right.
The edges of, be it, oftentimes geographical borders, because we have these, lists of, I bird in North America, I have my North American list, so I have my state list. So there's borders, and of course, these are exciting because that's the point where you get crossover. And in instances, oftentimes these geographical borders can be, borders for bioregions, like you get down in Texas with the Rio Grande Valley. And this makes for really unique and exciting birding at places that, like I said, the birding can be great year round because of just the local birds there are unlike anything that you can see. So I want to talk a little bit today about that element of birding and how, as birders, we tend to gravitate toward. There's this great deal of appeal going to the edges of these ranges to see things that are different and maybe catch things that where vagrancy is going to be much more likely.
Yeah, gotcha.
As well. So but oftentimes it's with the rewards of birding these borders, there's challenges as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, down in Texas, the Rio Grande Valley, you've got, and this came into my mind because it's been in the press a lot lately with this border wall that's going through Santa Ana National Wildlife Refuge. And the American Birding Association has really been taking the point for the birding community in terms of raising awareness and advocating. And, I don't want to get into all of that here, but for folks who are listening that really want to know what's going on with this border wall in this wildlife refuge and how it impacts this crown jewel in the Rio Grande Valley.
Oh, no doubt.
I encourage you to go check out some of the things that the American Birding Association is putting on their Facebook page, online, through their podcast.
Basically, the Trump administration is trying to honor one of its campaign pledges to build a wall on the Mexican border, the border between the U.S. and Mexico. And evidently the place they want to start is right in the middle of the Santa Ana National Wildlife Refuge, which, if you've ever been there, is unbelievably great and birdy and wild. And I've been there dozens and dozens of times in my birding career, and I've never had a lick of trouble, a lick of problem. I've almost never run into people coming across the border. And I've been there at all hours, So, yeah, I understand some people down there leaning one way or the other about the wall, but it's going to be a disaster for birding, a disaster for nature, and a disaster for ecotourism ultimately.
Yeah, exactly. And certainly birding down there, I don't think I've ever run into illegals crossing the border, but certainly Border Patrol. You go down there, and if you're beating around in the bush anywhere down the Rio Grande Valley in these remote places, especially outside of a wildlife refuge, it's not uncommon to have the Border Patrol on you in a second. So something you're not used to here in the Midwest or in most places in the U.S. where you're birding. So that's one of those things. And then you could look at the Rio Grande Valley, one of those really great southern regions where the tropics are just starting to. It's like the edge of the tropics. I almost call it's like tropical birding without a passport.
Right.
You're going to see birds like chachalacas and green jays and birds that aren't necessarily rare. They're common locally, but of course in the ABA area,
right,
these are rare birds and highly sought after, which is what makes these places like that so wonderful. And I know, in fact, you and I are in the midst of planning one of the Birdwatchers Digest Reader Rendezvous for 2018 down to the Rio Grande Valley.
That's right. Yeah, we'll be down there in November of 2018, just after the famous Rio Grande Valley Birding Festival, and we're going to be hitting some of these hot spots. I guess we can go down and check on what's happening at Santa Ana ourselves, because we're going there. But you're right about birding on borders, and even though birds don't pay attention to borders and maps and stuff like that, it's interesting how our geopolitical borders are often, as you say, in South Texas or in Southern California, Arizona, New Mexico. Often these are places where the geology or the landscape is really changing, and that's one of the reasons why there's a border there. So for example, we do get the tip of stuff that comes in from the tropics in places like southern Florida, where there's no actual border, but that's the edge of the North American continent. Well, the United States, I should say,
Yeah.
depending on your definition of North America. And yet, in the tip of Florida, you get a lot of the tropical birds that you would normally see in, the Bahamas or Bermuda, or even farther into the Caribbean. So it's fascinating to me to go to these places and know that anything could show up at any time. And, I even on the northern border, we have some habitats that are sort of up there on the edge, up there on the Canadian border, and you got to really travel to get to them, and that can bring some really exciting birding experiences.
Yeah, and what I really like about birding these places is you can go there and you know that there are going to be these locally common birds that are just so regionally exclusive, like the green kingfishers and, down in Texas, and the kiskadees and the chachalakas and whatnot. But you can go down there and you can pretty much be guaranteed to see these birds, and that's kind of exciting in of itself. Very, very much of a novelty. But whenever you're there, your head's always on a swivel, because that's where you could find an Amazon kingfish, you could find a roadside hawk. You're always looking for the possibility is so much greater that something is just barely going to get just across that border. That's going to be totally rare for down there. Right now in Houston, not exactly on the border, but there's been a jabiru, large,
that's incredible,
woods, stork type bird. Pretty rare bird for North America. So there's those two elements. The common birds down there can be really exciting for us, people who don't live in the area. But that possibility of always something really rare coming over, and there's different. The southern border isn't all the same. You look at birding in the Rio Grande Valley in Texas. It's an experience. It's very different in my experiences than birding, say, southeast Arizona.
Yeah,
another place on the U.S.-Mexican border. But southeast Arizona, you've got such different habitat.
Yeah, you've got the Sky Islands out there, where it's basically a little bit of Mexican mountaintop that's been chopped off and transported by the, I'm sure the rising and falling of the tectonic plates and the upheaval of the Earth's crust and stuff. So yeah, you can climb up to altitude there and get things like, red-faced warbler and hepatic tanager, and of course they've got that spotted owls down there in Fort Huachuca.
Flame-colored tanagers.
Yeah, just really cool stuff, and of course a huge diversity of hummingbirds.
Totally different birds than what you're seeing in, say, the Rio Grande Valley, bordering on Texas. And another difference about it too is the Rio Grande Valley is a big, kind of a very populous border. Lots of cities and towns on the borders, very well, highly developed. Whereas you go out to southeast Arizona, and you're really going to be birding in much more of a wilderness experience there. Yep. Almost a lot more remote. Obviously, the terrain there with all the mountains makes it much more challenging to get around, so that has something to do with it as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why Geronimo lasted so long. He was I'd like to know what his favorite bird was. Think about that. He's like, those folks were living up in the mountains and nobody could find him. I always think that's fascinating. When I go to places like that, I'm always into the history too.
Yeah.
I like to get a feel for who's been there before and what cool things went on. And I remember the first time I went out to Arizona, reading the sort of the history of the Wild West, as we like to call it. Pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you've got the other, so you got those southern borders that we're attracted to for all those tropical birds. Then you can go north to St. Paul and the Pribilov Islands, and it's a different sort of set of challenges there.
That's like a little chunk of Russia there, really. Asia, like Attu and Gamble Island. Those are places that people go to, like you said, head on a swivel. Of course, you've got a lot more clothes on up there because it can be freezing cold. But yeah, head on a swivel for those Asian vagrants. Stuff coming over from the Far East and from Russia, really. And if you can see from your house up there, from your rental house, you could see Russia.
Are there houses in those Pribilov Islands? I don't know.
Sometimes.
But certainly you're not going to get even, from what I've never birded. Have you birded up there before?
I've been to St. Paul. I've never been to Attu.
Okay.
And I've never been to Gamble either. Those are two places I'd love to go to.
It's not the kind of place that I understand that you go to where it is the usual accommodations that birders would expect here in the lower 48.
No.
It is a little bit more of an expedition type of experience. Am I
Yeah.
right?
Oh yeah, it is. When I was there, and I went with on a trip with my mom years ago to St. Paul, and we were flying from Anchorage out to St. Paul. We got all the way out there. It's a several-hour flight, and we couldn't land because the fog had come in, so we had to fly all the way back. And
Yeah.
the airline put us up in the scariest, skankiest motel room with a heart-shaped bed. And my mom, I just looked at my mom and she said, "There's no way. Go buy us a 6-pack." So I went next door, got a 6-pack. I came back. She's already on the phone. She's pulled out the list of Birdwatchers Digest subscribers out of her backpack.
Oh.
And the first person she called said, "Oh, I know a place you can stay. I'll come get you. I'll be there in 20 minutes." And totally saved us from having to stay in the no-tell motel in the Oedipus suite. It was not going to happen. But man, when we got out to St. Paul, the weather was so crappy. We wore every stitch of clothing that we had, but the birding was incredible. I mean, just peeking over the cliffs and seeing the tufted puffins and the red-legged kittiwakes and the horned puffins and just all the other, it was incredible. And to be on that in that landscape, that harsh landscape, and seeing how people have been eking out a living there for all these years, it was a really, really fun experience, and we still talk about it all the time.
In places like that, I mean, who's going for vacation or tourist type of experiences on St. Paul?
Yeah. Well,
birders pretty much, right?
I suppose are fans of the Deadliest Catch, because a lot of those fishing shows are filmed in that region too. There, Dutch Harbor and so forth. But yeah, it's a cool, and you think about some of those places that just have a little bit of a totally weird and disparate habitat in them. One of the places that I've never been is Hawaii. It's the last state that I need to visit for all 50, and they've started a birding festival there. I guess they're having the second annual one coming up this year. But that's a place where you got to get there pretty soon, because the endemic birds are disappearing.
Yeah, and I don't hear about birders, and Hawaii has not been something that has been a hot destination for North American birders until recently, because of it, for listing anyways, because It hasn't been part of the ABA area. Now that it is, it's got a little bit more cachet. Right. But I don't hear a lot about Hawaii being one of those places like St. Paul where you're getting it's desirable because you're getting vagrant birds coming in, but
not
more
so
for
much
those endemic birds,
rare endemic birds, and a few established exotics that are there. But like the nene and a lot of those unpronounceable Hawaiian birds. You don't go there and rack up a huge list, but the birds you get are super special, and ones that in most cases you can't get anywhere else.
Yeah, exactly. Not unlike birding, say, in Cuba. Which is one of those places where I think of that. So you've got Hawaii to the west, you've got, St. Paul and, Alaska up to the north. You've got the Mexican border. You've got the Florida Keys down south. What's the birding border on the east? Do we have one? I don't think we do.
Well,
is there a far eastern destination?
I think what it might be would be, of course, you can talk about the boreal forest up in Maine as being kind of special, but within the eastern United States, you've got these little pockets of kind of border-like stuff where you can go up into the mountains in West Virginia and basically get a guild of Canadian boreal forest birds because of the altitude. You can do the same thing in western North Carolina in the mountains. You can get far northern breeding birds at the southern extent of their range. The other thing, and that's more of a habitat thing than a border thing. But I would also put out there that, like taking a pelagic trip off of North Carolina.
Yeah, absolutely.
You get out there 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 miles, and you're into a whole different suite of birds.
That's true.
And if you can manage to hold your lunch down, which luckily I always have, but it's pelagic birding is pretty awesome. It's something that I've really enjoyed doing off of North Carolina several times.
I think birding the borders does require, by and large, a little bit of a greater sense of adventure and a willingness to sort of go with the flow as a result. It's not always the case. I would say someplace like Southeast Arizona, the Florida Keys, the Rio Grande Valley, pretty accommodating places,
Mm-hmm.
but not like going out 50 miles to see an pelagic trip or going up to remote Alaskan outposts where
Right.
that sense of adventure has to be in you.
Right. Right. Well, so what's your best border bird that you ever gotten? Sticking with the border bird theme.
you know um a couple years ago at the Rio Grande Valley, the Amazon Kingfisher that was
Oh
sighted.
yeah.
It was good. I was with our friend Paul from Koa, and he was just a budding birder then, and that was a chase experience where I got a call on the phone from Jeff Boughton, said, "Hey, he found an Amazon Kingfisher. You gotta come here and see it." Hopped in the car, broke all sorts of traffic laws to get there to see this bird, which ended up sticking around. But it was the thrill of just everything in the moment there, and being able to share that with someone who was a relatively new birder who could kind of see like, oh, there's this side of birding as well.
Right.
It's not just about flycatchers and such as
Right.
that made that memorable. But also Southeast Arizona is just one of those places that I find the beauty of that in the landscape there to be one of my favorite places to go. How about you?
Well, I alluded to the being up in along the northern border with Canada, and this really isn't a story of a bird coming across a border, but it's getting into that specialized habitat. Years ago, after a birding festival in North Dakota, I took off and went up to Roseau, Minnesota, to try to get my life Connecticut warbler, which I'd been ridiculed by my birding friends for 20 years. I was always on the wrong side of the bush for the Connecticut warbler and never could find it, never could spot it, never could see it. Missed it by a whisker a bunch of times.
Mm-hmm.
So I was going up. I had some intel from some local birders on where to go. I went to scout the place the night before and went to this shooting range that was, out of business, literally right on the Canadian border. And there was a border crossing right there where a lot of trucks and traffic were checking through. But you kind of went off into the woods on this shooting range. And I'm just standing out there kind of looking around, and here flies a giant gray bird very slowly across the meadow, hauling a rabbit in its talons. It was a great gray owl.
Oh yeah.
I did
Yeah.
not expect
Wow.
to see it there. I knew there was a microscopic chance. That was thrilling. And then the next day I got up and went to the place and got my life Connecticut warbler. So those were two birds that I really wanted to see for a long time. And of course the Connecticut warbler had been my jinx bird for years, like 2 decades. So
Mm-hmm.
those were kind of good, cool border things. And it was neat to be there by myself because even though there was nobody to high five, it was still,
Yeah.
it was more of an adventure. And, I did a podcast about that a few months ago on This Birding Life. I told the story of that because it was almost my last life bird. I had a little mishap, but that's just, people can go listen to that if they want to.
Yeah. So we're going to be crossing borders pretty soon, aren't we?
We are. We're headed to the British Birdwatching Fair. It's my almost annual at this point trek to go see the biggest commercial birding event on the planet. Founded in
Something
part.
our listeners can look forward to, and I think our next podcast will probably be recorded there.
Yeah, we'll do. I think we will. I think I'll try to record a few there. It's always a good opportunity. It's a great event, co-founded by my friend Tim Appleton, and he's a great guy. It's always a thrill to see him. And it's at this point, it's kind of like going to Old Home Week to see everybody there. And you and I will be recruiting people to come to the American Birding Expo about a month after that, and we'll be actually filling in a lot of our people that have signed up as exhibitors to come. We're really not over there trying to get English people to come to the expo, although
No.
they're certainly welcome if they'd like to come. And you're getting ready to cross a border too, right? Before we
That's
go
right.
to across the salty pond, you are going where?
I'm going on a week-long motorcycle trip, hopping on doing the Easy Rider thing with a longtime buddy of mine. We're going to head up to the Canadian border. We're going to do this loop trip around Lake Superior. It's going to take 6 days to go around Lake Superior clockwise, enjoying the scenery, doing some camping, and just getting away and unplugging for a little bit. So I'll bring some binoculars with me as well. Hopefully do a little bit of birding, but.
Now, would you consider yourself more Peter Fonda or Dennis Hopper?
Oh, definitely more Peter Fonda.
Okay, or Dennis Weaver. There's that. You could.
There's that too. Yeah. Or Peter Weaver.
Hey, right. Well, hey man, have a super great trip. and I'll be anxious to hear. Be safe, Be safe. Don't
Oh,
try.
yeah.
Don't try to like go no hands with your binoculars up, or
Before we cut out here, though, I'm going to be long stretches of road with just my thoughts in my head, in my helmet. Occasionally, I've been known to pop in earbuds and listen to a tune or two. Do you got a recommendation for me?
I do. I got a couple of them. I heard a couple songs just in the last few days that I Shazammed, and that's a cool app that your phone can basically tell you what the song is if you got a good.
And now apparently it's a verb.
And now it is a verb, yeah. So I heard this gal. I've been a fan of Patty Larkin for a lot of years, and she had a song called "Lately" that just had great vocals in it. And she was singing with a male singer whose name I'm not drawing on right now. That was phenomenal. And then there was another gal named Lauren Barth who had a song called "Mama Don't Cry." Both of these, they were back to back on the radio as I was listening, and they were just really, really, really good. So I would recommend those two things. Patty Larkin, the song is "Lately," and Lauren Barth, Lauren Barth, the song's "Mama Don't Cry." Those are just, sometimes you find a song and then you swim upstream and you hear a whole album and you find somebody that, oh wow, I really like this person.
Yes.
Sometimes it doesn't work out. Sometimes, The Knack with My Sharona didn't really work out so well. It's a one-hit wonder. Or, Dexy's Midnight Runners with Come On Eileen. Not so much. But a lot of times anymore I'm finding that swim upstream, listen to the whole album, and you're like, man, there are 4 or 5 songs on that album that I really like. So,
well, I always appreciate you, Bill, expanding my musical borders.
we got to stretch those ears, brother. It's just like doing yoga and stretching out the body, stretching the mind. You got to stretch those ears.
That's right.
And wear ear protection when you don't get your ears blown out, okay? On the motorcycle.
I usually had earplugs in.
Good. All right. Well, hey man, be safe. Say hi to Jack Nicholson if you see him out there and while you're doing the Easy Rider thing. And
Will do.
I'll talk to you later, buddy. Be safe.
Sounds good. Take care, Bill.
Bye.
That's all for this episode, bird people. Never miss a single episode of Out There with the Birds by subscribing to the podcast RSS feed. Go to birdwatchersdigest.com/podcast, scroll down to Out There with the Birds, and click on the link on the right that says subscribe. We'll send you each new episode when it comes out. Special thanks to our sponsors, Koa Sporting Optics, and to the Reader Rendezvous Birding Adventures from Birdwatchers Digest. Until next time, good birding, and we'll see you out there with the birds.